Does that work?
Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
cannot hear. Still cannot hear. Are you there? Nothing yet. I think I can hear you.
All right, can you guys hear me now? How's that? Okay. All right, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay. I had to log in with my my phone because for whatever reason my computer's microphone it's working internally here, but it's not coming through to the computer. So I apologize, folks, for the delay in getting everything going, but we've got an interesting show tonight. Hold on one moment. I'll set this up here. All right. Let me get a word from folks that are on the ground there. Can you tell me how's the audio quality? Okay, great. All right. I apologize for the rough beginning of the show, folks, but you know, I've seen stranger things, and we're going to be talking about a strange topic tonight, so it's no wonder. It's the first time I've had this kind of thing happen, and but not surprising. So I'm going to start over, I guess, with my introduction. Folks, tonight we have an extraordinary guest who brings with her a story unlike any we've heard before, especially on this show. Usually I'm covering political topics, or I'm covering things that are going on in the news, and we don't usually get into topics like this, but Johanna, you know, a mutual friend of ours, had reached out to me and you know, and asked me to check out your story. And there was something interesting about it that to me was something that I wanted to talk with you. You've written a book called the Theologians of Orion, and folks, this I have Ronnie Theroux, and she's an author. She's written a book about an experience involving extraterrestrials and UFOs, and in particular, her story dives into discussions about what happened to her mother, and so there's a commonality about what happened to her mother and, you know, what has happened to her. Well, I guess, you know, the reason why I'm going into this story tonight and wanting to talk to you, Ronnie, is because my mother, when I was 3 months old, in the back of a car, and I've never spoken about this publicly, but my mother and my aunt were driving up to Northern California, and they were on Highway 101 in California, just outside of Carmel, when they had an encounter. And both my mother and my aunt saw what could easily be described as a UFO flying saucer type of you know, craft. It shot across the sky and stopped suddenly, beamed down a light, then shot across the sky to another location, beamed down a light. It was doing this like all over the sky. And they shot off into a fog bank, and then they ended up driving into that fog bank, and it scared the hell out of them. And you know, my mom is somebody who has never lied to me. You know, she's and both her and my aunt witnessed this, so you've got more than one eyewitness, and it's just never been explained. And so, you know, you can go throughout the scriptures, and I remember the first time I saw read through the book of Ezekiel in the Bible, and it seemed pretty obvious to me that what he's describing there are UFOs. So it's not that this is a common phenomenon that is only something that's happened within the last 50 years. I mean, you go back and there's paintings and stuff like that that have pictures of what appear to be UFOs in them, going all the way back into time immemorial. You've got cave art, artwork with what appear to be extraterrestrials. So there's a lot of there's hieroglyphics, in the Egyptian pyramids, right, that look like UFOs. So I don't know what these things are necessarily. I will give a disclosure right off the bat that I'm not making or forming my opinion on them just yet. I have some ideas and I have some theories, but what tonight is about is I want to hear your story And I know that this is a topic that a lot of people find very fascinating. They're very interested in. And then within recent days, and I've spent my entire life working for the government, and a good portion of it, and I've had a top secret clearance, I will just tell you, for the last 27, almost 28 years. And I will tell you, it's not something that I've ever come across, when doing my line of work. But I do know that the government has recently come out and admitted that they had a top secret program where they were looking into these things. You've seen stories that have come out of multiple countries, including the governments of Mexico, the government of France, the government of Greece, the government of Italy. Japan has a unidentified flying object program. There are multiple countries around the world that have acknowledged that these things exist, but very little has been said, by the government, other than just admitting that they're looking into these things, and they don't really want to say a whole lot more than that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you and allow you to just start by sharing a little bit about yourself and sharing your story.
Well, we didn't start having this communicate. This kind of happened later on in life, because I'm not young anymore. But so like in 2012 is when my mother and I started having some kind of awakening experiences. Aside from each other, she was drawing strange drawings of people and strange beings, and I'm sitting here doing research on the internet about where we came from, because I had some time on my hands at that time. I'd had to leave a job at the time, and so that's when it all started for us. It really didn't start there; it started before there, way when I was young, even from the start, from the age of 4, from what I remember. About communication. But when it really became apparent was after I went to this UFO conference. So that was in 2013. It was February. And so I thought, well, my mother had told me that she had seen a ship up close. And, she had told us this a long time ago when we were all very young. And so I thought, well, I'm kind of interested in that. Why don't I go to one of these UFO conferences? And I was a little hesitant because I thought it was going to be weird and weird people. And surprisingly, it wasn't. It was a lot of normal people with experiences, sharing their own experiences. But I was having some strange experiences there. It's kind of almost like when I got there, it was kind of start showing, they being the beings out there who are trying to say, hey, wake up, we have something to tell you, or something we want you to do or share with people. But so I was having some strange experiences there. And then so when I went home, and I'm thinking to myself, this is weird. What's going on here? What's going on? I had bought a book and went home and started, reading it. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time, is this real? Is this stuff real? And I even said that out loud after I put down this book I was reading. And then I walked over to the light at the dining room, turned it on, and there were two or three of the light bulbs exploded. Just pop, pop, pop. And then I jumped, and I went, okay, then I needed to go down to the hall and turn that light on, and that light just popped and sparks were flying. But so, and then, so it was at that point. So after the UFO conference, I was having all of these different experiences and communications and dream interactions, and even a visit from Jesus. And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? so I had called my mother after a few of the experiences, and I called her and I said, Mom, I was at this UFO conference, and some people I met there said, I should ask you more about it. So I asked her, and she said, she was in Riverside, California. That's where I am, is in California, not Riverside. She was 17 years old, and she and her cousin had gone out to a drive-in movie. It was in 1958. And their aunt said, do not stop anywhere. You get straight home. And she was very strict. And what did they do? They stopped off at a malt shop. So they stopped off at a malt shop, got whatever, they had there, and then took off. And then they took off and they're driving, they're flooring it because they got to get home quick. And all of a sudden the ship came up from behind them, over up into the front of their car, and had completely stopped their car. And they looked at each other, and my mother noticed that her cousin had the gas floored, but they weren't going anywhere. And so the next thing they knew, they were getting out of their car, which was at the house, which was 5 miles from where they were seeing the ship. The strange thing is that my mother was getting out of the driver's side, and she had not been the driver. And so they had walked up to started to walk up to the stairs to go into the house, and their cousin kept saying, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And they got into the house, they looked through the window, and they saw the ship. And then it sped off, and they said it was almost like it waited till they got in the house, and then it took off. And they noticed that their aunt was fast asleep, and which would have never happened. She was very strict and would have waited up for them. So there's a whole, a thing behind that where people believe that the extraterrestrials put the people to sleep. It's that's talked about a lot in ufology. So that's where it started.
So let me ask you something. In for me, hearing about that story when I was young, of course, I like maybe in my teens, actually, when my mom and my aunt first told me about what they had experienced, and I was just 3 months old, basically in the back seat of their car, and they were heading up to Northern California from Southern Cal. It sent me on an interesting journey of trying to, read up on things. And I always approached it cautiously. I had a very powerful encounter with the Lord when I was 16 years old. And it was, there's no other way to describe it other than supernatural. I mean, it was a powerful experience. And I've had a number of those types of experiences with God since then.
Wow.
But I've also had encounters with demonic beings as well. And again, it's not something I don't think I've ever talked about publicly. Certainly not any kind of, public forum like this, but the cat's out of the bag, if you will. The can of worms has been opened. So we're going to get into some of these things, and we're going to talk about it tonight, because I do think that we are entering into an era, a time where this type of phenomena is becoming much, much more accepted. In fact, I would say that I think people are searching for answers, and I do have some concerns, because I think that at least in my experience, now I've not had any encounters that I remember, with UFOs or with extraterrestrial beings or anything like that. But I have had encounters with what clearly were demonic beings, interdimensional, if you want to call them that, or whatever, and I think I've had encounters with angels as well. And I think there's a parallel between extraterrestrial aliens and what, people, what they perceive as that, and these otherworldly beings that are spiritual in nature, which in some cases are pretty physical as well. In many accounts of where you hear about people having these encounters, with like other entities, demonic or angelic. What are your thoughts on that? And where do you stand, I guess, just so we can this is a controversial subject, so I want to lay some groundwork, from the very get-go, just so that when I'm talking about my experiences or I'm talking about where how I view these things, and you're talking about it, I want people to know where you and I are both coming from, because they may be different places. I've never spoken to you before tonight, but do you feel like these things were from another planet? Do you feel like they are connected or related to spiritual beings? Do you think they're interdimensional? What are your thoughts on that?
You're kind of um,
Yes.
okay, good. You're there. Okay, because you were kind of coming in and out. I was missing some of what you said, but I think what you're asking me is who these people are and what is this? So, so for all of these years that we've now had this communication, it's been since 2013. Apparent we're having this communication. We come to find out that these people, these are actual physical people. They told us they are from the Orion constellation. They, I already said they are physical people. They're not spirits. They're not bad, evil spirits, anything like that. I know that I'm sure a lot of people say, oh, well, all, you know, communication that's telepathic or channel or anything, it's all evil. And it can't be 100% evil. There's, there's good spirits. There are some bad spirits, but it can't be 100% evil. People get a little bit, they want to shy away from that. But if you were to really just read all the words and everything and what they're all about and why they came forward, and you would understand it was for a good cause.
Do you feel like the beings that you've had a connection with, they claim to be from, you said, the constellation Orion. What is their, I guess, what is the message that they, why, if that's where they're coming from, what would be their point of contacting us? And, what is the, I guess, their reasoning for, trying to connect with human beings? And have they mentioned any kind of, other entities from other places? Because clearly there are people who have had these experiences that have not been pleasant experiences, that have been, very frightening and terrifying experiences. So have
Yes.
they mentioned any of that kind of, about other entities that are not good?
Yes, they have. They did say that, they're, as a matter of fact, when I said something about, the evil entities, and I had told my mom, which I speak to my mom, and they hear what I'm saying through my mother, and they respond. So just to let you know how that goes. So when I'm saying I'm speaking to them, I'm speaking to her, and they're hearing her. It all sounds very strange. It sounds crazy, but this is real. And but what they had said about they had said, yes, they can be very tricky. The evil spirits. I think after a while, you would figure out that they were evil if that's what was talking to you, speaking to you. And I do believe, because I have had some sort of negative things come to me as well. And it was right before I started this whole spiritual awakening, this whole awakening to this discovery. I was like held down in my bed and felt like I had something put over my mouth so I couldn't speak. And that happened several times. Also, when we were doing this awakening, it was happening a lot. And they had said it's these bad entities because they said they can't hurt you. Don't worry, they can't hurt you. They just don't want what they're trying to do is keep the truth from coming out, the truth about this contact that we have. And so maybe with your story as well, maybe that could also relate because you had also an experience, a godly experience. Then you have the entities that don't want that to get out to the people. So that's what I how I understand it, and it makes complete sense to me. But
You mentioned
these
what you.
people, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say what you described about something holding you down and putting, its hand over your mouth. So I had that same experience, and actually having that experience, I would say at least once a week, through my high school years. I was having all kinds of, what they call paranormal activity happening, very scary stuff. And multiple occasions I would wake up and I would be paralyzed. I couldn't move. Would have some dark figure over me, and I couldn't say anything. I couldn't move. And all I could, and by the way, none of this stuff started until after I became a Christian, which was really weird because I would have expected that maybe before. I had had some experiences before becoming a Christian, but it wasn't until after I had that initial contact with God and the Holy Spirit and this powerful experience that about a year afterwards, I started having all of these negative experiences, and they were happening so frequently I thought I was losing my mind. In fact, but I know that there was something that was real going on. It wasn't just in my head, because one of the nights when I had this happen, a very close friend of mine, Christian brother, who I had really become close to during my kind of discipleship, as a Christian, he was 2 cities away, and at exactly the same time, we were having the same exact experience. And I called him immediately afterwards. It happened at 3 a.m. in the morning. And I called him right afterwards. And the only thing I could do to make it stop and go away was I kept thinking in my head, in Jesus' name, get away from me. And I just kept thinking it over and over again until I could finally, get the words out of my mouth. But I had to struggle to get the words out of my mouth. And as soon as I said that, whatever this was, it disappeared. It was gone. And I was able to sit up, and I called my buddy Billy, and I talked to him. And he was going through exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. And so there was something definitely happening, and on a spiritual level, that we were both encountering it. It was not just a figment of my imagination or something in my head. So it's interesting that you were talking about that, having that experience too.
Yeah, and what I started doing was, because it was happening a lot, because during the whole awakening and learning all this information about unknown things that we're getting from this contact, it was happening a lot. And so I learned to start asking for protection. Before I went to bed, I would ask my guardian angel to please protect me from them. And then it worked. I really have not had that ever since.
Mm-hmm.
But what what's really strange was it just happened just recently, and I can't remember what I was dreaming about. It was another one of those dreams that really weren't a dream, and I yelled in my dream, and I said, "Mom!" I called for my mom, and then I called her the next, that morning, and called her, and I said, "Mom, I had some strange dream, and I called out for you," and she said, "I heard you." Yeah, that was weird. She said, "You said it one time," and I said, "Yep." She said, "You just yelled, Mom." She goes, I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't know what that was. But now that you're telling me, now I get it. So there's a lot of strange things going on. My mother has amazing abilities. As we have gone on in time, I've discovered that she can She can talk to the dead. It just and they can answer back. There's two-way communication. It's really amazing. But the people that have come through us, um, they basically, these are the people that they told us that God created an advanced race of people, and those first advanced race of people were the people from Orion. And that might be why you see like the pyramids in Egypt. There are three pyramids line up with the belt of Orion.
That's
And
true.
because they were there.
You know,
And
that's an interesting, because there's been a lot of archaeological study about the pyramids and pyramids in Egypt, but also there are large mounds here in the United States, and most scholars agree that these preceded the native peoples who we would have expected to be the ones to have built it. Same in Egypt. They don't think that the pharaohs or the Egyptians built the pyramids of Giza. They don't think that they built the Sphinx either. That the dating on those things and seem to predate uh, the pharaohs and seem to predate, just like the mounds predated the Native Americans who came here. They don't know who made these things, and it is interesting. And you're right; they do seem to the pyramids of Giza do align with the Orion, the belt of Orion. So that's kind of fascinating as well.
yes, and
So
so what I've understood from this contact is that once I had this contact and we're going weeks and weeks and weeks into it, I'm like, now I understand some of the communication I was having when I was 4 years old, and when I was 9, and when I was an adult. It was sparse, but so one of the first messages I received was I was 4 years old. My mother was very pregnant with my little brother, and I was standing next to her while she was talking to some people, and all of a sudden a message came into my mind that said, if I was born from my mother, then how was the first person made? And it made me look at my mother's stomach. And so why would a 4-year-old be thinking such a thing? And I think from that point forward, that is what got my interest in trying to find out where we came from. Is there really a God? And it's something I always thought about. But these people that have come through us, they said they have gone all around the world in all these different languages, and they've been trying to get through to people here about not only our environment. And this is nothing to do with the BS climate change talk that goes on. We do have a very polluted planet. So they said they would like us to do more about the pollution. They have helped us out and done things and send things down to us, but we need to do more and we need to step up. They said they would like us to do more for the homeless. And they said that we are in end times, and that is one of the reasons they come forward. And they said they pretty much figure it's time for us to know where we came from. And so this is a very, very important contact. And I know that probably a lot of your listeners don't. This is, if this is the first time they're hearing of, contact and channelers and whatnot, there's plenty of these folks in the UFO community. But ours this is a different contact. This is very different. These are the divine. These people are the divine. They are the source. They are the ones who watch over all the worlds and keep the worlds going. And they said that their job is to preserve peace and balance of the worlds.
Have
And
you, I want to clarify something real quick. I'm watching the chat as we're talking, and one of our listeners has asked the question: when you say that you're talking to these things through your mom, is your mom still alive? I'm assuming that you're talking to your mom, and your mom has some sort of connection. Is that the
my
case?
mom is, yes, my mom is 83 and she's still alive.
Okay.
She, I do have some communication, but it's very sparse. It has been sparse, and I'm starting to get more channeling lately. Like I get some images. I'm thinking of something, and an image will kind of pop up to me, very faint, and it kind of gives me the answer. So that's been happening a lot
So
more lately. But my mother has free flowing telepathic communication 24/7.
I want
It's
to
always
just
working.
and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I want to. It's important for me to communicate as we go along, and we're discussing this. A lot of the people that follow my show, they are, come from an evangelical Christian background, and I as do I. I would consider myself an evangelical Christian, but I would say I'm probably more educated about the subject than most people who I hang with on Sunday. And but I want to just share some things with folks as we're going along. So when you mentioned channeling, I've experienced something very similar to that. But in the world of Christianity, I think that is no different, quite honestly, than having visions or hearing the Holy Spirit speak to you. There are scriptures that talk about uh, that we have to test the spirits, and so that indicates that at least in the times of Christ, people were hearing voices. They were hearing the Spirit speak to them, and they said you have to test them. What say you about how do you know as how does your mother know as she talks to these things or hears these things that what she's hearing is not something trying to deceive her, but is in fact something that's a good entity or something that is of God and not of the devil? Or does that theology of the concept of God and the devil, does that even apply in your view of things?
Um, my mother, my mother pretty much is just the channel, and she doesn't have any. She knows that it's a good contact. Um, she honestly kind of sometimes doesn't want it. She's too
Mm.
busy. She says, I don't have time for this. And um, she's like, Ronnie, I wish I could just take it and give it to you. And I said, I think it's starting to come to me already, which is fine. But um, so we've been going many years and thousands of hours of question and answer sessions, and it's all been about the betterment of the people, which is coming out. So you really just got to look at the words, read the words, try not to dismiss them. Um, you know, some people just want to dismiss it right off the bat, but it's what I always say is read the words, look at the words. I have many question and answer sessions in the book, and look at how they respond and what are they saying, and it's nothing evil.
So on that note, we had all kinds of technical difficulties, and I actually gave a full-blown introduction, but it got all messed up because nobody could hear me. If you would please tell folks about, and I had mentioned you in the book, and so please tell us what's the name of the book and what's the kind of the background on that book, if you would.
It is the Theologians of Orion. There it is, right there, if you can see it. Um, and I only became an author because of this contact. I would like to write more books, and maybe I will when I retire soon, hopefully. But it was such an amazing experience and contact. And listen, I have gone all my life, not being involved in ufology or spirituality, and this came to us kind of late in life, and it's just not something I always was into, but it came to us, and I was just so astonished, and I just said, oh my God, this is amazing. And I knew it was meant to be, and I knew that from early on. We were selected a long time ago. However it worked, I think I have ideas of how it happened, but it sounds kind of crazy. But so I have, in here, uh, you know, the whole story, the story of how it all happened, how it unfolded, about us, a little bit of who we are, kind of what we, went through in our lives, and kind of and it's an amazing story. There's drawings of the beings that she had drawn. There's some really strange names they had channeled to her, these names of people. Some of these are the people that channel her. I'm showing it on here, and some of them are people on
Are
other
these
planets.
now let me ask you something. These beings that are from Orion, do they look human? Do they look like, or do they look reptilian? Do they look like the typical gray aliens, or what do they look like?
They look like, this is one of them at the top. I think it's both of them. They look like us. They told us that they are taller than us. They are stronger physically and mentally than we are. They have healthier blood than we do. They're 7.5 feet tall around there, and they're just way advanced than us. They are way more advanced. And one thing I forgot to mention was they also have come forward at a time where there's so much evil going on in the world, as I am sure you report about the evil going on and how it's overtaking the whole planet. And
Yeah, it feels almost. Sorry, I think there's a little bit of a delay because I'm using my phone. But it does. It feels almost like something has shifted in the last 5 years or so, or maybe longer. But it feels like there's like a demonic presence that has been given free reign, to just do whatever it wants, and it feels like it's like there's been a shift. Is the only way I can describe it. Like something that was holding back is no longer holding back, and I think I think a lot of people who are spiritually minded and spiritually sensitive are picking up on that. I think it's just to speak from my own belief system, I guess, is I think it's quite possible that that we know only what we know very little, basically, about history and about life and about what exists out there. I think it's very possible that that there are good entities and bad entities, and certainly the Bible talks about angels and demons. And when you read about it in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, it seems that the impression or the description that is given by the apostles, that is given also by whether it's the story about Jesus, and the shepherds, right, that had the encounter with the angel when Jesus was being born. or whether it is the situation of the those that went to his tomb and had the encounter with the angel, or you see all of the encounters with angels and demons in the Old Testament. It seems that they were very much, both a combination of spiritual experiences, but also quite physical experiences as well. In fact, there's a scripture that talks about being careful to show good hospitality with strangers, because you never know when you might be entertaining, an angel, and you don't want to miss the mark, I guess, on that. And so I think that our understanding of these things is quite limited, and I would say even more so today than it was maybe even 1,000 years ago, because of just how much we are, I guess, controlled in our thinking, by the world, and by our whether it's religion, which has become so dogmatic, and set in stone, and you can't think outside the box, or whether it's atheism, which also in the world of science, which has become so set in stone, and unless there's some sort of empirical evidence, it seems like there's no room for the questions or there's no room for saying, I don't know. And in fact, when I lived in Japan for 3.5 years, and my time there taught me something very valuable out of their culture. The Japanese have a very different view of life than most people, I would say, in the Western world. In the Western world, it seems that we're driven by this idea of having to explain everything in life, to explain the meaning of life. Whereas in Japan, when I asked some Japanese friends of mine, what is it that I think that what is it in the mind of Japanese, or the people in Asia? How do you think differently than how we think in America or in the West? And they said, "Oh, you guys are very opinionated." and and what he meant by that was that we have an opinion about everything, and we have no, we just can't accept that we don't have an answer for something. In fact, it's what drives Western philosophy, is the idea that we're going to prove, or that we're going to explain something. And they have a word that there's no English translation of, and it's shogunai, which means it can't be helped. So why worry about it? And we don't really have something like that in our language. But so that leaves me, I guess, a bit open to considering that there may be things that we don't understand, and certainly there are things that I believe, and things that I've experienced that I don't talk about publicly, because I don't want to, I guess, alienate. Interesting word, right? I don't want to
Right.
alienate, friends stuff. But you've chosen to be more open and honest, I guess, about uh, these experiences. What what do you think it is that drives you to do that? Because I think most people, even if they've had experiences like that, there's no way that they would ever talk about it, because they don't want to be ostracized. So what drives you, or what drove you to write the book? What helps you to overcome that fear, I guess, of being ostracized, and what has propelled you into talking about this?
Well, for for one, in the beginning, I was very excited about the contact, and I wanted to tell everyone. I could not believe it. I could not believe it. It just what I knew, and I knew that we had a big piece of the puzzle. We have we have the answer for a lot of those unknowns that you just mentioned. Like, we don't know, we don't know. We've got the answer of how this all works. They're coming forward now. But in the beginning, now that's how I was, and then I'm like, it took me a little bit. And I go, oh, Ronnie, you can't just come out and say this. You have to uh, I was out with it, and then very quickly I just started clamming up, and I said, I can't say this. And as a matter of fact, first book I wrote in 2014, put out there, I put out with a different name because I was worried. I was worried about it, and I didn't want to be, ostracized and people thinking I'm crazy and things like that. And then after a while, I said, you know what? Someone needs to be brave because there are millions of people who have contact, millions of people who have been abducted. There's so many people that have these great stories. Some of them may not think they're great stories. There's, you know, some are positive, some negative just because it scared them. Um, but someone's got to be brave enough to come out and say it. And so finally, I rewrote my book and put my real name on there. And I said, I'm just not going to worry about that anymore. And not only that, the UFO community does help because a lot of people have um, stories, a lot of strange stories. And so we're all kind of just fit in, I guess, there. Getting it out to the mainstream is a different thing, with mainstream news. But we really need to do it. We really need to get there. We need to tell the people, look, go to a UFO and go to the section where they listen to their story of speakers, you know.
You're breaking up now.
The real people that you want to talk to are the real people who learn. So there's that.
Well, it seems to me like you seem like a pretty rational person. When people think about UFOs and contactees and all of that kind of stuff, right? There's a stigma to it. There's this idea that these are a bunch of wackadoodles that probably are off their meds and, spent too much time, taking LSD in the 70s or whatever, right? But it is I do think that, and this is, you'll see me as I talk about this subject, the wheels are turning in the back of my head before I say something, right? Because there's always consequences, to being open about things in your life, and I've had enough experiences to know that there are just some things there are no answer for in our my current Christian theology or whatever, right? I had a lady once who was a chaplain, and she was a chaplain for a hospice. And I was working with her on a project, and I asked her, I just said, I'm just curious, but in your line of work, and I've always been one of those people who's curious and is not afraid to ask questions, even if those questions may seem inappropriate. And so I just asked her point blank. I said, is there anything in your job that you've experienced as a chaplain at a hospice where people are dying that can't really be explained by your theology or by, what you were taught in seminary? And she said, that's really interesting that you say that. She says, yes. She said, there's something that I've experienced, and it happens like 80% of the time before somebody dies. And this is her experience. She said about 80% of the people who pass on, about a day or two, or maybe even a week before they pass, they start seeing their loved ones that have gone before them, that have died before them. They start visiting them, whether it's in dreams or visions. And it's always to let them know or to give them comfort that they have nothing to be afraid of, that they're, that they need, it's okay to let go. And so, she brought that up to me, but that to me, I share that story to say that there are a lot of things as Christians, and I'm speaking, mostly to my people that are following me on the show, there are things that we can't explain that maybe aren't talked about in, in the Bible, or maybe it is, but it's hidden in a way that we can't necessarily see it. Like I mentioned about, the book of Ezekiel. It seems to me when I read that, like if I was reading that, not ever having been a Christian, just reading it from some guy off the street, I would read the first chapter and the opening, chapters of that book and go, "Oh, this guy's talking about a UFO." I mean, it's clear as day. He talks about a wheel intersecting a wheel coming out of a cloud of fire, and how there are portals around it. Like they called it eyes, but it's clearly talking about like some portals. Talked about the four living creatures, and that wherever they looked, that these discs were moving back and forth and darting across the sky. I mean, I don't know how else to describe that, but it sounds pretty dang clear. It's possible that maybe the Star of Bethlehem. There's people who have speculated that was some sort of a UFO. There's other incidences, the chariot of fire, which took up Elijah. He was caught up into the heavens by a chariot of fire with the horses that were fire. And so it to me, there's a lot of things that could absolutely, one could say, there's no real reasonable explanation for that in our worldview as it is today, right? You mentioned about having an experience with Jesus, and I'm really curious about that. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, it happened the night that I was talking about earlier when I said I was reading a book. It was a Dolores Cannon, and I she learns so much out of these regressions. And so after the lights exploded, two of them exploded, and then I went up to bed, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, I don't know what's going on here, because I'm having so many things happen. I'm having sort of, and in between the up and learning, all of a sudden this image came into my mind, and it was a man who was in a white robe, and he was standing on a path, but he was standing like kind of to the right of it, I noticed, and there was a space right beside him. And by this time I was able to scan, because I've had so many of these dream interactions by that time, and so I went down to his toes, and I'm scanning him all the way up to his. I didn't want to make assumptions as to who it was, but I knew who it was, and I'm like, this is Jesus. It's him. And I said in my mind, I said, why am I seeing this? And just then my whole body was shocked with the feeling of unconditional love. And it's the most amazing thing you will ever feel. It's like a love that you will never find here on earth. I mean, I wanted to go with them. And I knew that this was just all connected, that everything that we were going through, going to the UFO conferences, something was happening. I was having an awakening. They're trying to tell me something. And I felt like it was all about me, that my mother was just the channel. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, what's the story, what's going on here. And it would take, several weeks to months to figure that out. But just along the way, we gathered a lot of information. But that was it was just amazing.
I know that feeling.
You can't even describe it. It was great.
I want to share something with you. Now, I've not read your book, so but I'm curious. I want to share with you a vision that I had a while back, and it was powerful. It opened my mind to think that maybe my ideas of things are not exactly the way that the things that I've been taught aren't exactly how it is in the afterlife. I'm going to try to move my phone in a way so I can put it down, because let's see if I can get it. There we go. Better. All right. How's that? Is that all right? Okay.
Yes.
So I had this experience. Gosh, I think this was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Maybe it might have been longer than that. Now that I think about it, I think it was actually about 10 years ago. I had a dream, and it was one of those dreams that seems like it was just so real. When I woke up from it, I had a hard time recognizing that was just a dream, because it just felt like it was such a real experience. But in this dream, I was all of a sudden I was in this beautiful like valley, and it was just lush and green, and I'm walking with somebody in a white robe, like what you described, and I'm holding his hand like a child, walking along with him, and he was taller than me, and it was clearly Jesus. I couldn't see his face, but it was this brilliant white robe, and and I could see his hand and I could see his feet, and I'm basically following along, and I asked him where I was, and he said, I asked him if we were in heaven, and he said, well, this is like a place before you get to heaven, and is the best way I could describe how he described it. And in it, there were some people who were, I remember walking by this couple, and they were making love in the grass out in public. And I remember being shocked and kind of feeling like not knowing what to think about it. And I looked at him like, aren't you going to say something about this? Kind of a thing. And he said, there's no shame here. And he said, but you'll learn more as we go. And so then, we went a little further, and there was these like cottages that were up, along this like kind of cliff or along this wooded area. And we get up there to this cottage, and I look into he seems to be taking me through these houses or these cottages, and allowing me to look through and peer through the window and see what was going on the inside. There was a woman. She was older, and she had this really neat, clean little cottage, and it had all these knickknacks, and she was adjusting them all and fixing them all, and looks like she was patiently awaiting somebody, like she was waiting for her family to come for Sunday dinner or something. Like she had the table set, and she was just fixing things. And I looked, I looked up, or looked towards Jesus. I said, what's going on? And he said, well, she's waiting for her loved ones. She's not ready, to move to the next level. She's waiting. She's still attached to to her people that she left. And it was at that point, I understood what was going on with the man and the woman that were frolicking in the field. They were still attached to that, that feeling of eros, of sexual love, and all of that. We moved on. There was another cottage, and there was a guy in there, and he's watching television of all things, and he's watching a baseball game, and he's sitting there intently looking at the screen. And I just kind of looked at the Lord, and was really kind of freaked out by that. And I'm going, well, what's going on here? And he goes, well, this guy, that was his life back on earth, and he can't let go of that. And so the whole idea of this place was like a place to kind of let go of all of your connections, all of your identity of who you were, who you are. And there were two other things in this place that were really kind of eye-opening. One was there was a big old lake in the center of it, massive lake. And it was lined along the shores with people, and they're staring into this lake. And every once in a while you'd see somebody walk out into the lake, and then they'd disappear. And so I asked him what's going on there, and he said, well, these are people who are, in that lake. They can look into it, and they can see what's going on back down on earth. They can see their loved ones. and they can, follow what's happening on the earth. And I asked him, well, what about these people that are disappearing into it? He said, well, they failed. They could not let go of who they were. And so they're going back. Then off in the distance was this massive weeping willow tree. And there was a bright light underneath this weeping willow tree. And very few people would walk towards that tree, but occasionally you'd see somebody walking towards that tree, and they would walk under its leaves, and then they would disappear. And so I asked God, what's going on there? And he said, well, these are the people who were able to let go. They finally come to the place where they have completely let go of any sense of self, and they are moving on to become one with God. And right after that, I ended up waking up, and it was, like I said, it was one of the most profound dreams I've ever had. I really felt like it was the Lord speaking to me, and I don't know entirely, I don't understand everything from it. It doesn't jive with my, all of the doctrine that I've been taught as a Christian, right? But it seemed to me the main thing about it all was that this idea of, we have this concept of ourself, right? I'm Nate Cain. And as long as I'm hanging on to this concept of I'm Nate Cain and I am who, I'm this individual, it becomes difficult to become like Christ, to become one with God again. And that goes on even into the next life. It goes on even into the next stage, if you will, or whether that was purgatory or paradise or, the first heaven or whatever the heck you want to call it. It seemed to me like there was some sort of middle ground place, before finally getting to there. So I'm curious, is there anything in your book or anything in these communications that you had that talks about any of that?
Yes. I'm sitting here listening intently, and I'm going, there are connections. You really should read it. So when you're talking about this place, it's kind of like a waiting. It's kind of like a waiting place, waiting room. They're kind of waiting for their loved ones. So they hang around the earth. They still hang around there. This is what I've learned from these people from Orion. They said a lot of times when people die, they will that spirit will go on and they'll hang around the earth, but they won't reincarnate until their loved ones die and go meet up with them, and then they'll reincarnate together. So that the family stays with the same family a lot of times. Not every time, but a lot of times you reincarnate within your family. As far as the other comment you made about, well, there's something about if you don't feel like you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish in your life, you don't feel finished, then you will go back and you will reincarnate. You're not finished yet, or you left something undone on earth, then you will go back and you will reincarnate. And when they said it takes a lot of people, which means incarnations, to get to be with God, to get to be, to go to heaven. It takes a lot of incarnations to get to heaven. So I know people. I know
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that now. So that's a very controversial statement to make about reincarnation for a Christian, right? Because Christians don't teach reincarnation. However,
Right.
I've studied about this because that dream made me wonder, right? And what I have found is this, that the scriptures seem to be clear, that Jesus said to his disciples, he says, who is it that people say that I am? And they said, well, some say that you are John, or some say that you are Elijah or Moses or or Jeremiah or one of the other prophets of old. These guys are already dead, right? So, except for maybe Elijah, he was, caught up. but the point is that clearly they had some concept of that. I don't think it was reincarnation like the Hindus believe. And I've done some reading up on this, and they have something they believe in, transmigration, which means you can go from an animal to a human and, whatever. Whereas, pure reincarnation is the
I believe
idea,
that in
sorry, go ahead.
and oh no, I don't believe that in about the whole going into the animal thing.
Yeah.
We've been told that that's not the case, that we don't reincarnate into animals because
Now there,
animals don't have they don't have a soul. We
right.
have a soul.
Right. Now, there's also this idea too in Hebrew theology, right? Of I think it's called samsara or whatever, which is like this recycling of the soul. And so they have some concept of that too, and they have different sects within Judaism, right? That you had the Sadducees, which they didn't believe in the afterlife. The Pharisees did. The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, whereas the Pharisees did. And these people, they were in the temple together, usually arguing about those points. But these are things that a lot of people would say. Well, the scriptures say to be what is it, to be away from the body is to be with Christ, or they'll say, it is appointed for man once to die, and then after this, comes judgment or whatever. And so, some people, they would say that that's heresy to think about or to believe in this concept of reincarnation. But I do think that it is interesting, when it talks about heaven, the word heaven, right? There are different Hebrew and Greek words that are used, and they're not all the same. Same thing with hell. Like there's Sheol, which really just means like the grave. And then there's, Abaddon, which is like the place of permanent destruction where, there is no more life after that. And so, it's hard to know what to make of it. And I don't necessarily claim that I know the answer to any of that. So I just want to be clear for those people that are, following me on here. But I do think that it is an interesting subject. And one thing that we do know is that there does seem to be, at least in my experience, plenty of evidence that there is this, the soul is separate from the body, because you have tons and tons of experiences that have been recorded out there of out-of-body experiences. I've had my own, in fact. Man, we're going to pull out all the plugs and just, get into some strange things tonight.
Let's do it.
All right. So if you don't mind, we're going a little over time, but I think this topic deserves that. And then we had so many technical issues at the beginning. It was kind of running late to begin with. So I appreciate it, but we've got a pretty large listening crowd tonight.
Nice. How about if I share a channeled message?
Sure.
Go for all the people. I'll share this message. I thought it was amazing. I can't even come up with the right words for it. But I thought I'd also mention on my YouTube channel, if you just look under my name or the Theologians of Orion, I have a YouTube channel. I have like 6 videos there, and it's all channelings and their take on certain things like the Phoenix Lights and autism. A couple of them have messages. One's about the environment, and one of them is the one I'm going to read to you now. And some quotes, just some general quotes from them. And it's really amazing. But this is one of the very first messages they sent to us, or sent to my mother. They channeled it to her, and she wrote it down, and that's the original copy of it, and it goes on the second page. But I'll read it to you now. You were a challenge. We had to bring you to Earth because you were too different and you couldn't live in our world. We wanted you to be happy and prosperous, so we chose Earth as a planet best suited for you. You are our experiment, and we still watch over you. You need to open your eyes and listen to your Earth. We gave you the chance to all live in peace and harmony. You do not think beyond your nose. Remember, if you didn't look for help and fulfillment, what would you do? You would be lost.
You're breaking up pretty bad. You
And
still
we were
there?
too different. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you
Did you
broke
lose
up.
me?
You broke up pretty bad there. So
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I want to, if you wouldn't mind, start over again, if you don't mind.
Yes, I'll start over. You were a challenge. We had to bring you to Earth because you were too different and you couldn't live in our world. We wanted you to be happy and prosperous, so we chose Earth as a planet best suited for you. You are our experiment, and we still watch over you. You need to open your eyes and listen to your Earth. We gave you the chance to all live in peace and harmony. You do not think beyond your nose. The 10 Commandments is all you need to go by to live a good life. Remember, if you didn't have a God to look upon for help and fulfillment, what would you do? You would be lost. We want to help, but from afar. No way could we being weird.
Breaking up again. Can you hear me? Looks like you're frozen again. Ronnie? Looks like she froze up. Hopefully she'll be back with us shortly here. So, folks, she looks like I lost her connection, so hopefully she'll come back in. But let me share with you, kind of some of the things that where I stand on a lot of this stuff. I think that we don't know much. I think that we know very little. Jesus said to his disciples, he said that his disciples came to him and asked, why is it that you speak to us in parables, but to everybody else, you speak to everybody else in parables, but to us you speak plainly. And he told them there are some things that are just, that are not meant for everyone to know. And I do think that there are mysteries, even within Christendom, that we don't understand. I've recently taken on the book of Enoch, and I've started reading through it. Now, for those that don't know what the book of Enoch it is a book that is not considered part of the canon. However, it was part of what they called the Jewish pseudegraphia. And what's more important to note is that it appears that book was quoted from at least over 140 times in the Bible. For a long time, that book was thought to have been a book that came out later. And so that's why they called it the pseudegraphia, meaning that it was not original. However, a copy of it was found intact in the Qumran caves, which was where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And it was there with the other Dead Sea Scrolls, which included books like Isaiah and others. It also had a book called the Book of Giants. And in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants, it gives out this whole more complete, I guess you could say, description of the beginning of time of man here on earth. And what it lays out, it seems to make a lot of sense. In fact, it makes a lot of sense out of a lot of other scriptures that are hard to interpret without having the Book of Enoch. Jesus quotes from the Book of Enoch a couple of times. There's quotes from the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jude and other places. So it's clear that the early disciples would have read this book and would have been knowledgeable of it. So when I think about, that, just that fact alone. Oh, hold on. Ronnie's back here. Hey, Ronnie,
Yes.
there you are. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think might have been my issue here.
Yeah, you froze up there. So I was just getting into talking about the book of Enoch. And what I was saying is that it gives a whole nother history of the beginnings and origins of man. And it also talks about, these angelical beings, talks about how you had the fall of the angels, that there were basically, there was a fall that involved men, or I should say the sons of God mating with, the daughters of men, creating these giants in the land, that were, demigods, right? I mean, it lines up a lot with mythology. And when you think about like the Mount, Mount Olympus, and, and you think about all those types of things, I mean, it sounds very similar to a lot of that. But what's fascinating to me about the book of Enoch is that it appears to be quoted from at least 140 times in the scriptures. And it outdates, like, whereas it used to be until it was discovered intact in the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, along with books like Isaiah and others, and dated to be older than, copies that they had at a later time, which were, not, which were not very old. So for a long time, it was thought to be a fairly newer book, maybe that came along sometime between, the Old Testament and the New Testament. But now it turns out that it outdates many of the books of even the Old Testament. And that's been confirmed through it being found in and amongst the Qumran scrolls. So all I'm saying is that there's a lot of things that we don't understand, a lot of things that we don't know. Jesus himself, when talking to his disciples, his disciples asked him, why is it that you speak to us plainly, but to everyone else you speak in parables? And he talked about that there was information or things that they were meant to know, but that were not meant to be known by everyone. And that most people only needed to know what they needed to know to be, to live a good and fruitful life, right? But that if they, it's like that, it goes to that scripture that says, knock and the door will be open, seek and you will find. And so, I think that you were beginning to say something in what you were reading, and before you got frozen, and you said something about having, what you need is that, you have the 10 Commandments to live by. So maybe that's a good place for you to start back with what you were reading, because, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Okay, just start from there, or do you want me to start all over?
Yeah, start from there.
The 10 Commandments is all you need to go by to live a good life. Remember, if you didn't have a God to look upon for help and fulfillment, what would you do? You would be lost. We want to help, but from afar. No way could we socialize, reason being we are too different in our bodies, our way of thinking, our way of living. Marriage would be like a giraffe living and consorting with an ape. We would be creating a new, strange, and different world, a world that should be placed on another planet. This is what happened before. We took part of ourselves and developed you. Through time and error, we created you. We wanted you all the same, but different.
Now, let me say something to that. So this is something interesting. As when I was young and an early Christian, my pastor had pulled me aside. He saw something in me, I think, that I had a deep yearning and desire to understand the scriptures. And so he took me through a course of hermeneutics, and which helped me to understand the Bible. I learned like Greek and Hebrew lexicon, and learned how to use that as a tool to understand different words, and because things do get lost in translation, there's no doubt about it. Now, the word in the scriptures that says in Genesis, it says, in the beginning, it said, God said, let us make man in our image. Now, that's an interesting way of putting it. And, Christian evangelicals tend to simplify that by saying, well, that's the Trinity. That's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit talking. But that concept of the Trinity is unique to Christians. It's not something that those who wrote the book of Genesis. There's something called exegesis. When you read something, you're supposed to read it as if it was being written to the people in that time. And so to try to simplify that by saying, well, they're just talking about the Trinity, that's just not accurate. So one of the things that is interesting, though, is the word that is used for God. So the word God is used, there's many different words that are used and translated to God in the English language. El is one of those. But you also, though, have in that particular scripture, you have the word Elohim. And Elohim is a plural word. And in fact, Elohim is actually translated at least, I think, 14 times in the Old Testament as messengers. But most of the time it's translated as God. And so the question is when it says, let us make man in our image, was that God saying, hey, all right, angels or beings from Orion or whatever the heck they are, I'm commissioning you to go and make, go and create mankind. Here's the plans. Now go and do it. Is that possibly what happened? I think it's possible.
Yes, I do believe so. And I believe that there's a lot that we don't know here on Earth, and so we're just putting the puzzle pieces together through this contact. And God has his helpers, and that's who they are. And I think it makes complete sense that he's got helpers that he also taught to create. And while he does whatever he does, my understanding is that he is a physical person and he lives on a planet with a lot of children.
So I've got a comment here that I want to reply to. A friend of mine,
Okay.
Roger Zachariason, he posted on here. He says, "Apes us, what an insult! So why should we believe these Orion guys? Any bona fide prophecies such as the Bible is filled with, or just pie in the sky, high on weed, peace and love, sort of stuff?" Now, I know Roger, and I think that's a very valid question, though. How do you prove, right, that these things that are speaking through your mom are in fact bona fide, beings with superior knowledge and all of that? Is it possible? Do they have any kind of like prophetic words that they've given that have come to pass? And that would be a good test, I guess you could say.
Well, first of all, my mother's 83 years old. She has pretty much been a homemaker all of her life. She's never been involved in ufology or spirituality, doesn't really care about those things. This just happened to her. And the proof can be in the words. And there's been plenty of video of her, audio tape. If you read the words, and I hate to say buy my book, but there's a lot, would these kind of things be coming out of her mouth? And they aren't. And it's amazing. Some of the things, now the first book that I wrote, a couple of things that we put in there, they had said, hey, hurry up and get this printed because we're giving you predictions of something that's going to happen. They didn't say that, and it was, what happened was they predicted ISIS. ISIS came about, but they didn't say ISIS. They called them a storm. There's going to be a storm of people, and a lot of people are going to get killed. And it ended up happening. But there's so many things in the book so many things that have been said, documented, that there's no way it came out of a, you know, at the time, like 10 years ago, well, and continuing today, I say it's in the last, you know, 5 years, that's come out of 80, 75, 80-year-old, you know, who has no background in any of this stuff. It's the
So
words. Look
I
at
think
the words, read the
Sure.
words.
So, you know, I've had a couple of experiences where there were some like prophetic words that have happened. You know, and I would equate it to it sometimes. And I've had these things happen to me. So I'll share a few of them because I think it's important for, you know, since we're talking about this subject, and I understand what Roger's asking. I've had some experiences like this, and Roger, you know, feel free to chat in the comments, you know, here on this, you know, if you resonate with what I'm saying or not.
Are you still there? Your comment, oh, there you are. If you don't mind me saying, I'd like to comment about the apes comment. So they're not calling us apes. It's just a comparison so that they try to get, you know, across their point. They're not calling us apes.
All right, I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
All right.
I can hear you.
So I think my phone may have overheated. So,
Oh,
all right. I guess this is a hot topic tonight, right?
it's yeah, it's very different. It's very different for sure, and it's hard to it's not an easy thing to talk about, but you know, I want
It's
people to
not.
know. I
It's
want
not. All
people
right.
to know our story.
So, okay. So what I was getting ready to share was a couple of things that have happened in my life that were predictions, I guess you could say. The Lord showed me something, and it turned out to prophetically occur. One of those things was I was one of them was actually the night before my wife said yes. I had by that time in my life, I had already had a number of experiences of hearing what I believe God was, speaking to me through the Holy Spirit. And I had my wife had not had those experiences. And so when I told her that I felt like the Lord was telling me that she was going to be my wife, and, and she said to me, well, he didn't say that to me. Um,
Right.
I decided we need to take a couple weeks away from each other and just spend some time in prayer and seeking God about it. And I figured that God would speak to her during that time. And we came back and got back together, and she had prayed, but she hadn't heard anything. And she said at some point in our conversation, she said, look, how do I know you can hear God? And the moment she said that, all of a sudden I had a vision in that instance. And we were sitting out we were sitting on this like kind of a parking lot that overlooks this beach called Clam Beach up in Northern California. And I was looking at we were the only car in the parking lot, and there was like a light pole, and I saw this light pole bend down like in my mind's eye, and I saw it touch the ground, and the ground began cracking open. And then all of a sudden I blurted out before I could even pull the words back into my mouth, there's going to be an earthquake tonight. Now, at that time in Northern California, when I say northern, I mean like Arcata, like way north of San Francisco even. It's at the top of California. There had not been any major earthquakes up there in a very long time. And it wasn't like Southern California where there were a lot of quakes. And immediately, as the words are coming out of my mouth, I'm like regretting saying that, but it was almost like I felt compelled to say it. Well, I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next morning and I felt like an idiot because there was no earthquake. And until I called Melody, and it turns out there was an earthquake, but I had slept through it because I was used to them from Southern California, I guess. And but there was an earthquake, and it was a pretty sizable one that night, and it reached all the way up there to Arcata, California, in that area. Now, what was unique about that was I had an experience years before that where I was down in Mexico, and there was a guy named Quentin who was our youth director, and I was like 16, 17 years old. I was a new Christian. And Quentin, we were staying we were down in Tijuana area, Mexico. And we were staying in this like room with all these bunks, and I think he was on the bunk below me, and I was up above on the top bunk. And we were just chatting, and he goes, look, I'm going to tell you something, but when it happens, you can't tell anybody. He goes, it's really important. I don't want you to tell anybody about it. And I go, well, what? He goes, there's going to be an earthquake tonight. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I don't know how I know. I just know. And so I was like, all right, whatever, dude. So I go to sleep, and I wake up to the whole dang room shaking. And in fact, there had been an earthquake as far south. It was a strong earthquake down in Mexico City that was so strong. It's like probably I'm thinking it must have been like 92, 93, somewhere around that time period. But it was felt all the way up into Los Angeles, that far away. That's how big it was. And the epicenter was like near Mexico City. Of course, I woke up to this earthquake, and I started immediately shouting, oh, Quentin told me there was going to be an earthquake. And he's like, shut up. I don't know why he told me that, but it felt like something, like almost like it was preparing me for something that I was going to experience later in life. And that kind of thing happened to me on a number of occasions. And another example of that was we were practicing, trying to listen to God. And I went out with a group of friends. This was up in Arcata, California. I was, just out of high school, had moved up north. And we drove around, and at some point we ended up at the beach at night.
and I'm looking out at the ocean, and I saw a vision of this big mushroom cloud and like seagulls flying and a big tsunami. And I wrote it down in my journal, but I didn't think anything of it. Well, nothing happened until about 30 years later, and I'm living in Japan, and I'm there for the big quake and the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. And when I saw all this going down, I'm like, oh my gosh, it brought back to my memory this vision that I'd had years before, like 30 years before. And so I end up looking on the map, and it turns out that where I was standing, looking out across the ocean, is exactly straight across, on the same parallel that Fukushima, is. So, I think that there are things that that God can show us. The Holy Spirit shows us that, maybe he uses his angels clearly, can show us. You hear about the stories about Gabriel, and when he went to go, give, basically give the prophetic words to Daniel, right? That he was held up, fighting the prince of Persia. And he wasn't talking about the literal prince. He was talking about demonic entities that, were basically keeping him from being able to get to him. So, like I said, there's a lot we don't understand, and a lot of things that I think that it's possible that, that these beings, angels, aliens, whatever you want to call them, demons, or fallen angels, right? And also possibly aliens, that, they're all part of the same thing. There's a guy by the name of, I think his name is Dr. Hunt, who had done a lot of research into UFO abductees and people who had experiences. And he said that in almost every incident that people had with, UFOs and that sort of thing. Hold on a second here. That in almost every incident, there had been spiritual concepts that had come up. Some of them were very bad and evil and wicked and, demonic, clearly. And some of them were good, and were basically telling people to do the same types of things that Christ had taught. Love your neighbor, as you love yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, that kind of thing. Live by and follow the 10 Commandments, like you were saying. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for me. It doesn't necessarily, it's not enough for me to go and because it's not my experience, it's your experience. So all we can go off of is our own experiences, for any certainty of anything. But
Right.
But I think it's fair to say that your experience and your mother's experience is no less valid than my own, which are, quite fantastic, and some might even say crazy. I'm sure.
Yeah.
After this conversation, there will be a few people who will probably look at me, a little different, maybe in a more of a negative way. I don't know, but I know that more important than anything, that if I truly trust God and I truly believe and have faith in God, then I can say to God, Lord, guide and direct me. Don't let me be misled. Don't let me be deceived, but help me to find the truth, whatever that is, even if I find it uncomfortable. And I think that is a good place to be. And I think that is where all of us, have to go. If we truly want the truth and we truly want to know what it is that God wants us to know, then we have to be prepared that he may share something with us that goes against, our understanding. And there's this concept that a lot of, and I apologize if our conversation's going a lot more theological than maybe you expected, but it's important for me because of how strong my faith is, and because of how connected I am and rooted, with the church and with people in the church. And so I have to approach things from a very cautious standpoint, not skeptical, but cautious. And so, but one of the things that I came to the conclusion of many years ago, and I realized, is that I can't tell anybody what to believe. Like I can tell people what I believe. I can encourage them. I can tell them, hey, look, this is how I've come to interpret the Bible. This is how I've come to interpret life. But at the end of the day, until they have experienced their own connection with God, until they have experienced their own sense of understanding of the world, then there is nothing that I can, do that will really affect them. You know what I'm saying? Like it's got to be their own. It's like I heard a pastor actually once say, we all must have our own personal philosophy of God. And I think what he meant by that is that we all have to have that personal connection. We all have to, have that. And when we discover things, or we, have an experience, you can share your testimony, and, it's really, all it is your testimony, and so there's nothing wrong about that. And so, I think it's great that you've had the courage to do that. I think that's a scary thing to do in this day and age. I think people are, it's encouraged me, quite honestly, to share some things tonight that I've never shared publicly. And, and I'm realizing, what, maybe I should share about, some of these experiences that God's clearly allowed me to have. I don't necessarily understand them all. I don't know why I've had them all. But, and even some of the things that you shared about that your mom, you shared your mom's sentiment about, how she wishes she didn't have this gift or whatever. She wishes she could just give it to somebody else. She could retire from it. I understand that. I get that. In fact, there's things that I've experienced, even other things that I have not shared, with, sorry, I got distracted here, ADD. Roger's saying that he's in Bend, Oregon now, and that today he was reading Dave Hunt's novel about this very subject. Yeah, that's interesting. So Dave Hunt is the where I found that, by the way. I never would have known about Dr. Dave Hunt had I not gone to the Area 51, not Area 51, sorry, the Roswell, New Mexico UFO Museum. And it is in Roswell. And it's kind of hilarious when you drive through this little town. There's at least back then, there was a music store right across the street with a bunch of aliens all up on it. And it said, our music, our prices are out of this world. I mean, they've gone full blown, into commercializing all of this. But the museum was interesting, and they had a bookstore inside the museum. And I bought this VHS tape, brought it home and watched it. And Dave Hunt gives his experiences of researching the stuff, and how he feels that a lot of these things, a lot of people's encounters are in fact demons, because they, especially when they deny Christ, and they try to mislead people, or they create a lot of fear and, and a lot of horror, and trauma, for some of these people that have had very negative, experiences. So, but clearly not everybody's experience has been negative, and some people's experiences have been, enlightening, or awakening. And it's hard to know what to make of it, to be honest with you, sometimes, because you've got guys like, do you remember the Heaven's Gate cult?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it was in San Diego, and you and I were probably both living in California around the Riverside area at the time. I used to live
I
in
I'm
Pomona.
I'm from San Diego.
Okay, so you're
I
very
live in
familiar with them.
mhm.
Yeah, so
I
so
live in San Diego.
so you got these guys, like Heaven's Gate, right? And they, they ended up all killing themselves, right, to catch a flight on, was it
Yeah.
Ailey's Comet or something like that, or Hale-Bopp Comet or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just, it's insanity. Now, clearly,
It's
whatever,
it's
and
sad.
do I believe that the guy was crazy? Actually, no. I think that he probably believed that he was being, you know, taught by some benevolent being or whatever, and I think they were deceived, you know. And I don't think that he was just a crazy person, because if it's one person, that's a crazy person. But when you got a whole group of people all sharing the same delusion, that's, I don't think that's necessarily a crazy person. I think that's somebody who's experienced some miraculous things and have heard some amazing things and have seen. So this is why I believe that the scriptures tell us to test the spirits, because sometimes they come, clearly as, maleficent, is that the right word? Evil beings, right, that mean us harm.
Hmm.
But sometimes they come as angels of light, and we're warned about that too. And so, when you mentioned about your experience with Christ, that when you were talking about that, I know that's genuine, because that love that you were talking about, that I've had that experience. I know exactly what you're talking about. When I had that dream and I'm walking with Jesus and I'm holding his hand and I felt like a child, it that feeling is that same feeling I had in that moment. I've also had experiences that, like I said, I'd mentioned earlier, there's some things that, they don't teach you in Sunday school. And it's not because, I don't think it's because they're trying to deceive us or keep us, in the dark. I think it's just that they don't know. And so the church sticks to the 10 Commandments. They stick to the basics, like Jesus said, he didn't teach everybody that he came in contact with. He didn't get into teaching them how to perform miracles and do all these, wonders. His 12 disciples were able to do miracles, and there were 72 that he sent out in pairs that were able to heal the sick and cast out demons and those types of things. But we also know from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 21 through 23, it says, and on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord. He says, and I will tell, oh, hold on, let me get it right here. Many will say to me, Lord, Lord. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord. But I will tell them, depart from me, for I never knew you. He says, the scriptures, it's interesting. He says, and many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not heal the sick in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not perform many miracles in your name? That's where it says. And he says, but I will tell them plainly, depart from me. And the interesting thing about that, he says, for I never knew you. Only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. He's making it clear that even people who perform miracles because they understand the knowledge, they have the secret wisdom, the secret knowledge, whatever the secret sauce is to be able to do miracles, that's not enough. That's not what it's all about. Those things are important. It's great to have power and be able to do things and be able to understand all mysteries. But if you have not love, right, it's like a gonging cymbal. And that love, of course, that he's talking about is that love that you were describing, that love that is powerful, that is all consuming. And I think that is, I think, the test. Jesus said that the law of the prophets is summed up in these two verses. There are two commands. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I would say that anything that is telling you to do those things and is acknowledging Christ, I would say that passes the test for me. The moment it starts telling me to do the opposite of those two things and it doesn't acknowledge Christ, that's where I say, no way. Depart from me, you know? And so that is, that's kind of like the rule that I live by. But with that, it means I've got to also be humble, and I got to recognize that there are a lot of things in life that I may think, you know, are the truth, but aren't necessarily the truth, you know, because maybe it's dogma, maybe it's theology that was taught, you know, passed down, you know, from generation to generation, and you know, has become corrupted over time. You know, we see that a lot of times
Right.
in the church. I mean, we have to acknowledge that the church, and when I say the church, I mean whatever the church is that we're going to at any given time, is going to get things wrong. They do. And that's why we have to have, that's why I think that pastor said what he did about how it's important that we all have our own personal philosophy of God. I would say it a little differently. I would say we all have to have a personal relationship with God. Because without that, then we can be deceived and we can be, you know, led astray and you know, brought, you know, into situations that might harm us rather than help us.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's getting late, and I want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I'm going to definitely get your book and read it because, and I apologize for I didn't really have the time this week to get to do that. I always like to read the books, you know, by people before I bring them on. But I'm looking forward to reading yours because I really want to, and I'll probably, I've got, you know, your contact information. So I'll probably reach out to you afterwards and probably hit you with a bunch of questions, but I'd like to have you back on after I've read it and, you know, and be able to, you know, do a little more deep dive into it. If that's all right with you.
Yes, I think you should. And maybe my mother can come on as well.
You know what? Maybe my mother could too. That would be an interesting, you know, that would be an interesting show.
You could ask them direct questions.
Hey, my mom's could share some stories about me. You know, I'll tell you, I dragged her all the way out to the high desert near Edwards Air Force Base because I wanted to go look for UFOs. You know, I was probably like in my 20s. We sat out there for hours. We didn't see anything, but it was an interesting. You know, the internet was just new at the time. It was just like, you know, I think I had my first computer, and people were just starting to get an internet, and things were starting to get dropped, and there were, you know, bulletin board services and stuff that you could find information. And so I was hearing all these rumors about Edwards Air Force Base. So we went up there and sat up there in the dark, my wife, my mom, and myself, and we looked up at the stars for probably 3 hours until we said, all right, we're not going to see anything tonight. Let's go home. But
you try using these, oh gosh, those special binoculars. I can't remember what they're called. You can see things with them.
Are these the okay? I know. You know what? I just saw something on I think it was on TikTok or Facebook Reels, or it was on one of those like short reel things, right? It might have even been Twitter. But somebody was saying that red phosphorus night vision goggles. Yeah, there used to be. I guess they used to use these ones that had like red phosphorus, but they took them off the market because guys were seeing things that weren't there. So that's what they claim. I can't prove it. I don't know that that's true. That's just what I heard, and I find it interesting. So I just saw that the other night. I'm going to probably see if I can find me some because that would be interesting.
So I think there's a lot of stuff in my book I think you'd be really interested in, and it might open a whole new world to you.
I'm sure.
So everything.
You know, listen,
yeah.
I was going to say one last thing that I want to just mention. You know, I've had I only barely touched, you know, the tip of the iceberg. Okay, with the stuff that I've seen and experienced myself, and most of which I've never talked about publicly. But I have had I've had my own experiences with some things that I can't explain. Now, the one thing like I said, I've never had any experiences with, aliens or extraterrestrials. I've definitely had experience with demonic entities. I've had experiences with angelic entities, and I knew that's exactly what they were. They were more spiritual than physical, although the demonic ones I had some physical interactions with, which were quite scary. And in fact, were frightening enough that I didn't even want to talk about the subject or even look into anything about it for years. I mean, I'm talking for at least a decade. I just avoided the topic altogether. And it occurred after I was saved. But I had I had an interesting experience, and maybe this next time that you come on, we can talk about this. I had how am I going to say this? I had a Bigfoot experience.
A Bigfoot.
Okay?
Oh,
I did.
cool.
I did. And I did not believe in that stuff. I thought that was a bunch of hooey and a bunch of baloney. My wife, who grew up in Northern California, up in the Redwood Forest, she believed in it because she'd heard stories from very credible, reliable witnesses, Christian man in her church that, that was highly respected, who had an experience, and it was, clear as day to him, and he never wanted to talk about it. Talked about it once, got ridiculed, and then never talked about it again. I had an experience. Actually, my second oldest son was getting married, and we decided, to go have a men's, bachelor party, guys, night out camping under the stars. And so we all went up to Misha State Forest, and we had an experience. And all I can tell you is I didn't see it, but it was so loud and we heard it so clearly. This whooping type sound that came up in the middle of the night. It was about 100 yards away from us. All of us heard it. There was no one out there. We took a fire road all the way out there, in the middle of 81,000 acres of forest. We were dead center in the middle of it. And there was a road that kind of like circled the area that we were at. We would have heard any vehicles coming up or leaving. And there were no vehicles that came up or left. So is it possible somebody pranked us? Maybe. But the sound that this thing made, I can't mimic it because it covered like 3 or 4 different octaves, and whatever it was clearly pissed that we were there. Now, I've often wondered, like, what is the deal with these things? Clearly there's something that's real. A lot of people have these encounters, but nobody seems to be able to find their bodies and all that. And recently I found some interesting stories of people seeing these things just disappear in them, like dematerialize in front of them and appear out of nowhere in front of them. And so I've often wondered if these things are extraterrestrial. Maybe they're not even from here. Maybe they're interdimensional, and that's why we can't find their bodies, or that's why they're able to just disappear. Or that's why they're so good at hiding. But here's where it gets really weird, okay? And it makes me almost wonder if there is something spiritual related to these creatures or to these beings. I moved from, I was living in Maryland at the time, and this experience was all the way up at Misha State Forest up in the Pennsylvania, Maryland border area. I moved, about 20 miles, 30 miles away to West Virginia. And I had a second experience with one of these things here at my property. And again, it was late at night, same time, about midnight. And I had bought a brand new barbecue grill, and I was putting it together I have like a netted screen room. And I decided that I wanted to get this thing put together. I was like a kid at Christmas, excited. I wanted to put it together and be able to use it the next day. So I was up all night working on it, and had horrible instructions. So I'm like trying to figure it out, and I'm banging on something with a hammer, trying to get this pole together. And Weber, somebody says, yeah, I think it is a Weber actually. And so I'm putting it together, and all of a sudden I hear the same whoop, except this time it was a higher pitch. Like it sounded like it was a female or maybe a juvenile. Like it was clearly not the male that I had heard, up in Misha State Forest. Now I live right on the Potomac River, and so there's a lot of woods along the river and on my property. I have 9 acres, and then on the other side of the river, it's all C&O Canal, and so it's all woods and and then a little bit of canal. But I heard this thing whoop, and same kind of sound, just higher pitch, and then all of a sudden I hear coyotes, and they're chasing something or coming around, circling something, and it's right, maybe the same distance, about 100 feet away from where I'm doing my work, and then I hear one of these coyotes, yelp like it got hit, like a they all take off. And so I don't know why I've had 2 encounters with these things. It's weird. Like, what are the odds of that? I would say that's pretty weird. So I do think that there, I don't think that that's by accident. I think that there's got to be something, spiritual about it. I don't feel like the one that I experienced here, I don't feel like it meant me harm or anything. But the one that was up there in Misha State Forest, I do feel like it was, like, I did not feel safe. In fact, I had a gun with me, and I scrambled to load my gun because, I was afraid for my life, and I had the wrong ammunition. So I went up there with the wrong ammo, and so I could not sleep, and I got home, and my wife was like, "Man, you guys are home early." I'm like, "Yeah, we experienced something I don't want to talk about." But it was pretty freaky. Well, we went up there the next day, and or I'm sorry, not the next day. I think it was like, no, it was the next day, because we went up there, my son and I, and he had like a couple, it was my son, the one getting married, and my other 2 sons, and then I think two of his friends, and we were all there, and we all went up to where we heard that sound the next morning. And what we found, now I didn't know at the time what a Bigfoot even sounded like. I'd never looked into that. I didn't believe it, so I never looked into it. But when we went up there, there were these teepee-like structures made of like whole tree trunks that had been just snapped off and like stacked. And they were all up in there. And I've since learned that that's a common sighting around these things. Also, it had rained the night before, and so the ground was really wet, and there was leaf litter all over the ground. And I ended up I had brought with me a FLIR thermal camera, or thermal, this is a thermal camera. It's like used for like seeing if you got a leak behind your wall, water or something like that. So it'll show like heat differences and all of that. And I don't know. I was thinking, you wouldn't see a footprint because there's leaf litter all over the ground. But if something stepped in it, right, then the leaves should be wet from touching the water that was underneath. And so maybe you'd see something with a FLIR. So I walked around that thing, and wherever I saw kind of like some leaves like pushed down, I snapped a photo with it with the FLIR, and I got some photos that clearly, without any doubt, are a Bigfoot. I mean, it matches identical dimensions, shape, everything. You can see the toe imprints, the foot, the heel, all of that, the foot pad. Oh. And so it was just an interesting experience, and I can't explain it, but here's where it gets weird. So I mentioned that I had that experience here. Well, my neighbor, I've got one neighbor that's got video of a UFO taking off from the woods out behind us. And then my next door neighbor told me a story when we first moved here, and we were just talking, and he said that him and his wife were asleep at night, and they saw these green orbs floating around and flying around in their woods. And then I think he said they passed through his window, like into his room, and they were freaked the hell out. And so people in this area have had a number of encounters with, unidentified, what are they calling it these days? Unidentified aerial phenomena. It's the new one. By the way, they do change that term every time they come out and announce it in the public, the government goes and they change that language on their on their internal servers. so they don't call it that, but that's what it used to be called for a while. But it's interesting. So yeah, our government's aware of them, but I don't know that. I don't know what they know, because if they do have any programs, it's so compartmentalized that, even with a TS clearance, you're not going to see it. But they either that, or they really don't know what these things are, and they track them, but they really don't know what they are. And I think there's probably a little bit of both bits of that in there,
They may not have the full story. I think they know.
Sure.
I think I know a lot, seen a lot, probably have evidence of things,
Yep.
crap and whatnot, but they don't have the full story of what it's all about. Why gray aliens? Why gray aliens? Why ships?
Somebody here, Janet Londigan, said that one guy got rid of the orbs with the name of Jesus. That's fascinating. That would again seem to indicate that there's something spiritual to these things. And like I said, the experience that I had with that dark.
Uh-oh, you froze. There you are. You froze for a second.
Yeah.
I think those orbs are, some people will say, like drones or feelers. They're sent out to do research.
I think you're right.
Collect information. And I
I
think
think you're right.
I think it's all part of what the advanced races of people out there do. They send their gray aliens, they're programmed gray aliens as their workers to come in here and do the job for them. They pick up people, they test them for the effects of pollution in our environment. They test a lot of things. They have ships that get down low to scan for fractures in our earth to see if they can see how we're doing really, and whether they can predict earthquakes.
Well, did you ever see the movie Fire in the Sky?
Yeah, this Travis Walton story. And yeah, I've talked to him many times. I've seen
so
him
his experience was pretty dang frightening, and at least the way the movie portrays it. I've never spoken to him, but the other movie that is also supposedly based on a true story was Communion, and that was also another horrifying experience. And I do think that there's, like I said, I think there's some that are doing experiments not for good reasons, and others that maybe are, who knows?
Well, my understanding is the gray aliens are programmed to come and do a procedure. The procedures are for the betterment of the people, but, it would be frightening. Seeing one of those is scary. I wouldn't want to see one. That would scare me.
Well, I'll tell you what, if one of those things shows up in my house, it's going to end up shot. Because I am well armed now.
It's all connected. And if you read our story, you will see how it's all connected. The gray aliens with, all of those kind of things that we're talking about. The crop circles. It's all them trying to tell us we're here. We've always been here. And one of the things they said about the crop circles, actually, their quote was, "We just want to tell you we're here, we're playful, and there isn't anything we found we cannot do." And there's so much to know. I have an overall understanding now of how all this works. Some of the people that just have all the pieces and this and that and gray aliens, UFOs, and orbs, and I put it all together because it's all about.
If you ever read any mythology from like the Vedas, which is like the Hindu religion, or even the Japanese, their Shinto religion, they have their own mythology. It's pretty interesting. They have this whole concept of these beings that come from the heavens and these other beings that come from out under the earth, right? And the ones that come from under the earth are reptilian. They call them the Naga. in Japan and in India, they have something very similar. They're like serpent type, people. And then they have the other ones that come from the heavens, and they're in a basically a war against each other. And so kind of interesting.
The reptilians are real, from what I've been told. They are real. There are some negative ones, and then there are good ones. And from what I've been told, the good ones don't want to be associated with the bad ones. But yeah, there's that. And yes, that can be very frightening, maybe, to see one of those. It's frightening to see a lot of these different looking beings.
Well, even the angels, even the angels in the Old Testament, anytime somebody had an encounter with these things, they were freaked the heck out. They would fall prostrate, afraid for their lives, and the first thing out of their mouth was, "Do not fear, do not be afraid." So
that's what the message was in my mother's mind when she was picked up by the UFO, when I had taken her in for a regression. They said, "Don't be afraid. We will not hurt you." But one of the things I wanted to say was, there might be a lot of beings out there that are scary. They seem scary, but when you think about it, and think about all throughout all this thousands of years of humans, the most evil species is the human.
there's definitely a lot of bad people in the world, without a doubt.
Think barbaric, killing, and all the really bad things that go on. And especially, it's just kind of rearing its ugly head again in the last so many years, as far as just become more and more evil, especially with these, like ISIS groups, and, the beheadings and things like that. As a matter of fact, do you remember who Jihadi John was?
Yeah.
Jihadi John. So he was the one always with the picture with, someone's head. Yep. So the Orions told me this, told my mother. They said because he died, he had to have a lesson. He was going to pay for what he did. And so they said that they knew seconds before that he was going to be killed. And they were able to go in and take some of his DNA. And what they did was they remade his body. And somehow I don't know how, somehow they put that same soul back into this new body that made, because his body got killed. So they took him, they put him on another planet where it was cold and there was a lot of dangerous animals. And they put him there where he had to fight for his life every day. And they allowed him to remember the evil he did on the earth, and that was his punishment.
That sounds like purgatory.
Yes. So he got paid back for what he did, but the worst part, he was able to remember it.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's very interesting. Another thing I wanted to say about our story is, all of the things that I put in there, they are real, although I've kind of wanted to shy away from some things. But so it's really more of a story about me than anything. And it's going to be like, wow, how can this story just took this weird turn at the end? But I'm just here to say that's what really happened. That's true.
100%.
And I can't say what it is.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing it. It's been an interesting conversation tonight. I will say that's probably the most interesting one I've had on the show. Has been having you on here. And like I said, it never ceases to amaze me how life is full of interesting mysteries. And the moment that we think we got it all figured out is probably the moment we don't know anything, and so that's one of the things that I love about our human experiences, that we continue, as long as we're willing and open to, to learning new information, we can have, far more interesting experiences than we ever thought possible. So I always end my show in prayer. And the one thing I've come to believe in wholeheartedly is that that we can do everything we can in this life, and we should do everything we can to try to make a difference and do good and help one another. To stand up for the weak and stand up for the truth. But at the end of the day, we can't do that without God's help. We can try, but we have limitations. And so I always like to ask God for his help. Our founders understood the concept of providence. We seem to, as a country, lost that concept as of late, but I haven't. And so I always like to end in prayer. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll close up the show. All right?
All right.
Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to get into some really interesting conversation tonight, Lord. And I pray first and foremost, Lord, that you would help us to see and learn the things that you want us to learn and see, Lord. Open our eyes to see you where we've never seen you before, and open our ears to hear you, Lord, in ways that we've never heard you before. I pray, God, that you would, just as you tell us in the scripture, that you would teach us how to test the spirits so that we're not deceived, so that we don't fall the way of people like what happened with Heaven's Gates, Lord, or other groups of people who have been misled and led astray. But Lord, we pray that you would guide and direct us, and we trust you, Lord, and we believe that you can. You're capable of guiding and directing us and keeping us safe. But Lord, we also ask that that you would help us, Lord, to move into the possibility of eating meat and not just drinking the milk, Lord, of learning the mysteries, of having those experiences, Lord, of being able to operate and move and do things, Lord, in power and for the purposes of your kingdom, for the purposes of doing your will. Help us to always act within your will as we explore these things, Lord, and as we explore your words and your knowledge and your wisdom as it is passed on to us. Lord, help us to always acknowledge you in everything we do. And Lord, I pray a blessing over Ronnie and her mother, and Lord, over all of those, Lord, that are seeking the truth. I pray, God, that you would guide us to the truth, and we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, hey, God bless you, and thank you for coming on the show. And again, I'm going to read your book, and then I'm going to get in touch with you,
Okay.
and then we'll do this again, but it'll come from more of an informed, place of me having read your book and probably having 100 questions. So,
That's
with
okay.
that, folks, remember, just remember, stay strong, stay vigilant, and always seek the truth. And don't just settle. I guess if I were to leave, one thing, I forgot to do this, and I always like to do this. I always like to give my guests the last word. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If people take something away from this conversation tonight, and they were only going to remember one thing, what would that be? What would you want them to take away from this conversation?
That would be to please keep an open mind. We don't know everything here on Earth. We may have gotten some things wrong. And people are missing out by not opening their mind. And so I hope you keep an open mind. The only other thing that I have to say is that these people told us was that all they want everyone to know is that all God has ever wanted was for you to be good.
Yep, that's what he created us for.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Ronnie, for coming on. And again, folks, like and subscribe to the page. Please check it out. check out Ronnie's book. Again, for our guests, can you tell us the name of the book again?
It's called The Theologians of Orion, and it's on Amazon. I'm also on X. I kind of get political on there because I'm so angry about what's going on these days. And then on YouTube as well, The Theologians of Orion, and that is where some really cool videos. And I only put on there what are the most, I think, amazing and impactful things to learn from what we have here.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And folks, thanks for joining us tonight. We've had a pretty large group tonight, 2,000 people live viewing right now. So
2,000, wow.
Yeah. Pretty great show tonight. I told you, this topic, people are fascinated by it, as they should be. I mean, if it wasn't interesting, they wouldn't be making movies, left and right about aliens, right? So, but anyhow, folks, again, join us again for Tuesday and at 6 p.m., Thursday at 9, and Saturday at 9. So thanks for coming on the show. And I think this is the longest show we've done, 2.5 hours. Of course, half hour of that was technical issues, but still, it's been a great show tonight, and I appreciate you hanging in there with us. So with that, good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Raise some.
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.